Hello, my fellow teachers. Welcome to a very dynamic year of teaching. I wanted to demonstrate to you some of the new things that I was going to roll out, some of the techniques that I will be using in order to hopefully better suit or better fulfill the needs of my students. What better way to do this than discuss the case Lau versus Nichols? And without further ado,
The Honorable, the Chief Justice and the Associate Justices of the Supreme Court of the United States. Oh yay, oh yay, oh yay. All persons having business before the Honorable, the Supreme Court of the United States are admonished to draw near and give their attention, for the court is now sitting. God save the United States and this
I want to start
court.
setting some goals first before we go over the video. Our goals today are introduce the case, factors leading to the lawsuit, educational norms of the time. I want to also discuss any other factors needed to understand what was going on. Next, I would like to go to a detailed summary of the case. I'll be discussing the plaintiff and defendant, what each hoped to gain, and what was the court's ultimate ruling. Third, I'll be discussing the implications of this. How did this impact education and ELL? How does this impact you personally as a teacher? And last, I wanted to go over some reflective questions. These will be going into something more deep into critical thought. Let's talk about why this is important to you. Well, every Supreme Court case is important to you because every Supreme Court case affects our constitutional rights, and it trickles down into the state, which trickles down into us as teachers. So the best way that I can demonstrate this to you is through something called a case brief. In this case brief, I outlined the following. It was Lau versus Nichols. Every case has a citation. This citation is 414 US 536. It was after that it discusses the year, which is 1974. All right, let's discuss some facts about this case. San Francisco Unified School District had an influx of students after the desegregation movement with the Supreme Court decision of Lee versus Johnson. They received about 2,856 Chinese students as a result of this. They created a program for these students because they had some difficulties understanding the material presented to them due to language barriers. They were able to have 1,000 students in this program, but that left 1,800 students of Chinese ancestry with limited to no English ability without any supplemental English instruction. This caused people to question, especially the students and the parents of the students, whether those 1,800 students that were not receiving the supplemental education were equal to the 1,000 students that were receiving that supplemental education. One of these students was Lau. Lau represented these 1,800 students and he took it to court in a class action lawsuit. Let's discuss the legal question. First of all, because of that inequality of the 1,800 students versus the 1,000 students that were getting the supplemental education, did that violate the 14th Amendment? What about the Civil Rights Act of 1964? How did this create an equal balance that the Constitution said that we needed? Before this case was determined, it went to the district court. It was denied relief, which means Lau was denied his equal opportunity that he was looking for. So he took it to the Ninth Circuit of Appeals. They affirmed the district court's opinion. So he took it all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court opposed the ruling of the district and the circuit court's ruling. They unanimously affirmed in favor of Lau. The opinion of the court was given by Justice William O. Douglas. He stated that failure to provide supplemental English language instructions to students of Chinese ancestry did violate the 14th Amendment and the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Students that have a language barrier deprives them of the opportunity for that public education. There's this concept called concurring opinions happens when a justice agrees with the ruling of the court, but he has something extra to say, or he agrees with it in a different way than the court agrees with it. This happened with Justice Potter Stewart. Justice Potter Stewart concurring opinion was joined by Chief Justice Warren E. Burger and Justice Harry Blackmun. They stated that the OCR guidelines were appropriate as long as efforts reasonably related to the purposes of the enabling legislation. But Justice Harry Blackmun added another concurring opinion. He stated that he wanted to limit the court's opinion. He said that this case was important due to numbers. There was 1,800 students being affected. He said that if there were only a few students without these barriers, then the court's decision probably would have been different. As far as dissenting opinions, it was unanimous. I just put in A. Let's evaluate the significance of this. This changed the interpretation of the 14th Amendment and the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It was kind of a cornerstone for ELL as it is today. Soon after this decision was made, legislation was passed. The Equal Educational Opportunities Act of 1974 required schools to take appropriate action to create equal participation of all students. Then they realized that funding wasn't enough. They needed the Bilingual Education Act to increase their funding, so it did. Then the Lau Remedies came out. The Lau Remedies outlined a structure for teachers to teach students with limited to no English. These evolved into how we teach ELL today. That is the basics of this case. Now, I would kind of like to review this, make sure that we got all the key concepts. So, introducing the case, it was Lau versus Nichols. And this affected about 1,800 students of Chinese ancestry with limited or no English ability. They were not given any supplemental education to assist them. And San Francisco Unified School District had something in place, but this only allowed 1,000 students out of over 2,800 students to receive this supplemental education. Also, the schools were recently desegregated. Let's discuss the detailed summary of the case. The plaintiff was Lau. Lau was representing those 1,800 students with limited English, and they were hoping to receive a bilingual teaching or something equivalent. Nichols was the defendant, and they represented San Francisco Unified School District. They wanted things to stay the same because they had a program enacted, but it was not enough for everybody. They said that their budget could not reach all the students. Let's talk about the implications. The implications redefined the 14th Amendment and the Civil Rights Act of 1964. This made it include equality in language and the opportunities given to each student, not just materials being supplied. This led to the Equal Opportunities Act of 1974 and the Lau Remedies. This puts a legal binding on schools to test students for ELL and to offer programs to all students equally. So now number 4, I said we're going to reflect on this question. So I listened to the entire recording of this court case. I do this because case briefings and summaries tend to miss certain details. And one of those details I consider the human factor. Thomas M. O'Connor represented the defense. His case was a little bit lackluster and definitely not as thought out as the plaintiffs. He stated that he realized that there was inequalities in the system. We were told that they started this program to help English language learners of Chinese ancestry at this point in time, but it probably extended to other languages. His main concern was that there was not enough funds in order to create such a wide and all-encompassing program. Edward H. Steinman represented the plaintiff. He championed for teachers to teach in alternative methods with English language learners. But he also admitted that true bilingual schools were able to achieve better results than his methods that he outlined. The issue became that there was so many languages that it was impossible to teach in true bilingual fashion to all those languages, especially the languages that had very few students who spoke it. Now, if any of you have met me, I freely admit that I'm not the best Spanish speaker in the world. My academic Spanish is below par, and that's being very generous. If I knew true bilingual Spanish and academic Spanish, I could give better results to those of my ELL students that speak Spanish. Because of this, I dedicate a lot of my free time to learning Spanish and trying to achieve that true bilingual level. If I do that, I now achieve equality for my Spanish-speaking students. But what about my French Creole student? Or my Portuguese student? Or my Japanese student? There is no way that I can achieve the level of proficiency in their languages in any meaningful amount of time. Does that create equality? So if that doesn't create equality, what should a school do? Should they hire a teacher that speaks Spanish, French Creole, Portuguese, and Japanese? That is very rare. So let's step back a second. What about if we get a teacher that speaks Spanish, a teacher that speaks Portuguese, a teacher that speaks French Creole, a teacher that speaks Japanese? Okay, so now I have 4 teachers. Those 4 teachers are only assigned to a very specific few of their students. You still have that budget problem as well. It was mentioned by the justices multiple times that it was not their job to create a program to facilitate these children. And they said that it's up to the schools if they want it to be bilingual, true bilingual, or use these other tools that the plaintiff was speaking about. But they also said that there could be a third option, one that we haven't even thought of yet, one that could be a little bit better than all the above. Justice Potter Stewart said something at the very end of the court case. It was barely above a whisper, and people seemed to shrug it off as far as I could tell from the audio. He said that there were some extremists who said that culture was being lost in the homogenization of American schools. He backed off from this claim, and nothing more was said about it. A man named C. Baker in 2001 wrote about the benefits of bilingual education. He explained how some people might see the human brain learning 2 languages. Some people imagine learning 2 languages as one engine just going full bore and having a hard time keeping up. He explained this as students receiving a poor bilingual education and not truly bilingual. Due to this insufficiency, both languages suffer. A student does not master both languages, and in result, they struggle. And it turns out that they do poorly on standardized testing. But he also outlined that true bilingual education showed the benefit of that multitasking of 2 languages. Those students that learned both languages equally and efficiently were able to produce better results. They all scored better than average on standardized testing. This enabled them to have better critical thinking skills. I don't believe they felt that desegregation was wrong. What if, in the rush to gaining that freedom, they lost a little individuality? Now, I know I've taken up a lot of your time. I want you to go back and review, make sure we hit on all of our goals. I'm glad that you joined me, and thanks for letting me teach you. See you next time. If you take an equal the world was changing and everybody was super excited. I would be too.